Hi, I'm Zach Steele, and this is Tyler Hobart, and this will be our Week 7 recap slash buy low and sell high for ahead of Week 8. So starting us off on the buy low, I've got Miles Sanders. Obviously, you're not buying him if you need to win this week or next week, because I don't think he's going to play this week against the Cowboys, and they're on bye. But he comes back in Week 10. He's going to be a top 10 fantasy running back when he's back. And we're getting to that point in the season where you want to start looking at schedules for the fantasy playoffs, and Miles Sanders gets to play the Cowboys in Week 16. So if you've got him on your roster and you make it to the fantasy championship, he could be a guy that wins it for you.
Yep, I agree. So Terry McLaurin I have on here, he's not necessarily a buy low after a bad performance, but in my opinion, he's a wide receiver one the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I think Kyle Allen's fantastic fit for him in terms of just getting Terry a lot of receptions, and he's proven to have a lot of receptions over the last 2 weeks. I think he has like 14 and like also a touchdown. So I think he's just going to be someone you can definitely rely on. And if someone doesn't see him as a wide receiver one, I think you should and go trade for him.
I agree. So another guy on here, it's kind of the same story as Miles Sanders, but Christian McCaffrey. You all know who he is. He's 30 points per game when he plays, and very few players can say that. It's basically just Kamara and him right now. And this is probably your last chance to get him. I don't think he'll play this week, even though he's been practicing. They've been walkthroughs, and he hasn't had any contact yet. And I doubt they'll roll him out there. But so if the fantasy owner that has him needs to win this week in a bad way, I could see them still moving McCaffrey. Obviously, you're not getting him for free, but he's the best fantasy asset in fantasy when he's healthy. So getting him at almost any price is worth it.
Yeah, I agree. So I have Ryan Tannehill on here. I think he's a quarterback one the rest of the way, and ever since he's been the starter for the Titans, he's been fantastic and has a great floor, and he has some great targets he can look to, and they've been using him well, and he's been taking that role in stride. So I think he had a weaker performance against an excellent defense this week. And so if someone has him on their bench, I think you should go get him. And if you're in need of a quarterback, you're not going to pay a steep quarterback one price to get him.
I agree. So the guy I've got in here, I'm really just driving home with running backs, but Josh Jacobs, he's been on here before as a guy that he's kind of underperformed this season. He's obviously had the two big games, but both of those were a 3-touchdown and a 2-touchdown game. But I think fantasy owners are pretty frustrated with him. He just had a really tough matchup against the Buccaneers, who arguably the best run defense in the NFL, and his entire offensive line didn't practice this last week. So it was kind of something you knew was going to happen, but nonetheless, that really bad performance certainly makes fantasy owners unhappy with him, but it's not going to get any worse. He's a workhorse. They use him out of the backfield as a pass catcher a lot more than they did last year. So I think he's a guy that he's a fringe RB1, RB2, and a lot of fantasy owners are probably pretty fed up with him right now.
Yep. So I have Sterling Shepard on here. He just came back. I think it's a team with a bad offense that's going to need to throw. And he has at least 6 targets in the last 18 games. I think he's just a steady guy that you can buy at a dirt cheap price for whoever has him, if someone has him. So I think if you're in need of a wide receiver and you don't want to pay too much, I think you should target Sterling Shepard. He can be pretty consistent for you, I think, going forward.
I agree. So another guy I've got here is Allen Robinson. He's a target monster. This last game on Monday was his first game all season with less than 9 targets. But you knew what you were going to get this week. It's a tough Rams defense. So you had a feeling he was going to struggle with that Ramsey shadow. But Robinson still put up a respectable performance, and he's a guy that's got such a high floor because of the number of targets he gets. And his schedule in the fantasy playoffs is just cake. He gets to play Houston, Detroit, and Cleveland or something. So it's
crazy.
Like he could go nuclear in those 3 weeks, and he's just a guy that I don't think he's very expensive right now. He's probably just valued as a wide receiver 2, but at least during that stretch, he's going to be a clear wide receiver 1. He could win you your league if he's on your roster.
I agree. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
So I have Chase Edmonds on here simply because Kenyon Drake went down, and I think he's primed to have a huge workload, and he's a beast of a player, and he has a bit of a track record going back to last year. And so I think if whoever has him and doesn't see him as a running back 2, I think you should absolutely look to target him. He could be very cheap, and I think he's going to just be a workhorse for the Cardinals.
Yeah, and with Edmonds too, he's a better player than Drake. I think a lot of people agree with that. So I don't know if
so I think he's going to run with it.
Yeah, Drake's not going to come back to his job. So
no,
a lot of people view Edmonds as a rental, and you can probably get him really cheap for that. So the guy I've got here is Josh Allen. I know he struggled the last couple of weeks, the last 3 weeks really, but even though he struggled from a football standpoint, he hasn't necessarily been bad from a fantasy standpoint. I know he hasn't been putting up those explosive numbers that he was the first 4 weeks, but even this past week, he didn't have a touchdown, and he still had 18 points in fantasy. That's not bad. And that's his floor, and he's been doing it without John Brown out there, who, although isn't the number one receiver in that offense, I think he does a lot to help that offense function. So I think you're going to see a bounce back game and stretch for Allen once John Brown's back.
I agree. So I have DK Metcalf on here just because he had a tough matchup this last week, and Lockett took that entire game. And I think if you have an owner that's frustrated, maybe a little worried about his role going forward, I think you jump on that because I think DK is an absolute monster, best quarterback in the game, and they are going to need to pass, or they should be passing all the time. So I think you're going to be great with DK Metcalf, and if someone doesn't see him as a wide receiver one, I think they're wrong, and you should go get him.
I'd even say he's probably a top 5 receiver the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He really could be. So just go buy on that weakness.
Him and Lockett both could be, believe it or not. But anyway, so moving on to sell high. Number 1 here, making his weekly appearance, is Todd Gurley. He keeps falling in the end zone. He fell in the end zone on accident even this last week. That's how propped up his fantasy points have been by that, and that's not sustainable. Obviously, I think he'll have a good game this week because they play the Panthers, who have a very bad run defense. So you'll probably get one more week of good production out of Gurley, but after that, he's really going to fall off a cliff, I think. And I think he's like RB8 or 9 in fantasy this season, which is just ridiculous.
Oh my.
I could see a fantasy owner giving you Zeke for him, and I would do that in a heartbeat. I know Zeke's been bad, but Todd Gurley's worse, and Todd Gurley's not a good receiving back out of the backfield anymore either. They don't use him for that. If he doesn't fall in the end zone, he's going to bust for the week, so I would just get out from there if I can.
So I have Deandre Swift on here because he's had a pretty good last couple weeks, but I also don't think that's sustainable, kind of like Gurley. So Swift's in a worse position, I think, because he has less than 50% of their carries. So I think he's a really touchdown-dependent play. And so if you can sell high on that potential and the last 2 weeks of production, I think you're wise to do so.
Yeah, I like Swift the player, but he's just not getting the volume.
Yeah.
Another guy I've got on here is DJ Moore. I know he had a really good game this last week. He had 93 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 receptions, but he had a 75-yard touchdown on a broken coverage. And if you take that out, he didn't have a very good game. Broken coverages are going to happen, but he was still out targeted and receiving and paced in receptions by Robbie Anderson. I don't think he's the number 1 receiver in that offense, and I think a lot of people view him as that. So if you can get out, he's still got that draft pedigree. I'd get out of there.
I agree. So I have James Robinson on here just because last week he had a monster week, and I had him on the sell high a week prior, and it was his first week with 20 carries. So I think that volume is unsustainable, especially going into 2 tough matchups after the bye. So I think if you can pitch it to someone, you can get out of there and get a player that's going to be more productive going forward and into the playoffs, where the Jaguars are probably going to be trailing in the second half of the year in a lot of games, to where maybe that volume is not there for Robinson. But I don't think you should be selling him at any cost. I just think at the rate he's been producing, I don't think you need to ride him out if you can get. Sometimes the value just makes too much sense if you can move him.
Him or Josh Jacobs the rest of the season?
I don't know.
I
don't know. It depends on that line.
Yeah, I think I'd take J-Rob just because they're using him a lot in the backfield as a receiver too. But
just no competition there. So
yeah,
there's a lot of positive with Robinson. I think he's just done really, really well. And if you ask me if he's going to keep producing at level, it's kind of tough for me to agree.
I agree. So the guy I've got on here is Tom Brady. I know people are really enamored by the fact that a 43-year-old quarterback is putting up these numbers, but he's another player whose fantasy production is really propped up by touchdowns. I don't see that necessarily continuing. If in this game his 1 yard rushing touchdown was a Fournette or Rojo touchdown, it looks a lot different. Godwin's been banged
Mhm.
up. Evans hasn't looked the same. They got to play a bad defense in the Raiders. I know people are really hyped about Antonio Brown showing up and changing the world for Tom Brady in that offense, but I don't think he's going to be a huge factor. And I think a lot of people are viewing Tom Brady as a top 5 quarterback right now, but I'd much rather have guys like Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray or Josh Allen. If I could just do a 1-for-1 swap there, I would.
Mhm. For sure. So although I also agree that Antonio Brown's not going to be a big factor, I don't like how the Bucks went and signed them if you're high on Evans. And so that's why I
Yeah.
have Mike Evans on the sell high, just because he's been very touchdown dependent as we've had him on here for quite a while. And now you bring in Brown into just on paper, a loaded team on offense to where there might not be enough for Evans to really capitalize week to week, especially towards the end of the year when Godwin will be healthy. So I think you should sell high on Evans.
Yeah, and I think if you want to wait 1 week, I think he'll have a good game this week against the Giants, especially with Godwin out. But
Yeah, he
if you just
will.
look at his
But
splits with or without Godwin on the field, it's insane. He's been awful when Godwin's playing, and I don't think that gets better with AB in the fold too. So yeah, get out of there.
mhm.
Another guy I've got here, I know you're not necessarily selling high, but Juju, he finally had a decent game. He had, I want to say, 8 receptions for 95 yards, or it was 9 for 85. Either way, that's something, but still, he was number 2 receiver in that offense. Chase Claypool was a big disappointment, but he got shadowed by Butler the whole game. Um, so basically, the opposing team viewed Chase Claypool as the number 1 receiver in that offense, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think he's the number 2, and I think Deontay Johnson's number 1. I don't think Juju is close to either one of them, and he's still got that name value. So if you can trade him for a wide receiver too, just do it. You're not going to be upset about it.
Mhm. So I have Will Fuller on here simply because he's been a wide receiver 1 so far this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see that continuing, especially with Cooks getting more in the fold and getting a consistent role in that team.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you can move him, I think you'd be smart to do so, just because I don't think he finishes the year as a wide receiver 1 with so many talented wide receivers.
Yeah, Randall Cobb got involved this week too, so I'd be worried
Yeah,
about it.
and that's just annoying. So
Yeah. Another guy I've got on here is Christian Kirk. Back-to-back games with 2 touchdowns. That's not going to continue, obviously. I mean, he's the number 2 receiver at best in that offense, but he's had 2 really good games in a row, and I think you can trade him for a fringe wide receiver 2, 3, and I don't think he's even really a flex play the rest of the season, so I would move him while you can.
Mhm. Lastly, I have Devontae Parker on here because first off, I believe Fitzpatrick's great for wide receivers, and I don't know how that looks like with Tua, and they might try and run a lot more. And he's a bit banged up right now coming off the bye, and so I think if you want to get out of Parker, I think now would be a good time.
Yeah, I agree. I'm concerned about anyone not named Gaskins in that offense right now.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this week. If you guys have any questions about trades or any of that, feel free to ask us in the comments. I do my best to get back to all of you guys. If you want to follow my Twitter, I've got it right there. I'll link it in the description. If you want more videos like this, we do one of these every week along with a waiver wire and start sit video. Please be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, give us a thumbs up.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good evening, day, whatever time you're watching this.